The darkness had lifted, and they could now see the sky, far from its natural star-filled dark blue, turned sickly pond water green. The air was heavy and damp, completely changed from the cold autumn of the previous days. The smells carried on the tepid wind were like damp scents of reptile and decay. They all stood around the jeep, the boys leaned against the hood, and Barb staring off at the strange horizon, still rubbing her shoulder with an expression of deep worry and confusion. "What happened?" Rodney said, breaking the silence. "Yeah, I was kind of wondering myself," Bill said, wiggling his fingers through the bullet holes in his Wolverine t-shirt. I seem to remember feeling a lot deader a few minutes ago." "It was the wolf," Barb answered, with a morbid, deliberate seriousness. "He healed us somehow, and the rider stopped whatever was happening to that woman. He had a severed hand. I think it was from that other guy Dylan dreamed about." "But the snake guy escaped," Rodney sighed as he hung his head sullenly. "So we didn't stop it." "We helped stop something, but I think something started too." She turned to them, her face a smeared mask of black stains and blotchy white makeup. "What do you mean?" Dylan said, stepping closer and carefully studying Barb's face, noticing a change he could not yet ascertain. "The wolf did something, guys, when it healed you. And then it bit me. I don't feel the same. Come to mention it, I don't feel the same myself. I feel kind of weird," Bill said, popping his neck to the side with his hand. "Your hair," Dylan said with curiosity as he carefully lifted a blue strand of Barb's short bobbed haircut. "Your roots are showing." "He's right," Rodney agreed. I didn't know your hair was brown." "I just colored it," she answered, pulling a lock down over her eyes to study it. "So what do we do now?" Bill asked. "We go find our parents," Rodney replied, as if Bill's question was silly. "I'm not sure we're supposed to," Barb said quietly, as she now obsessed over her hair and her suspicion that it was now an inch longer. "Besides, I got a text from Mom saying that the National Guard showed up and started evacuations to some army base." "Well, then we go there," Rodney answered in shocked disbelief at Barb's casual dismissal of their parents' relocation. I think we're supposed to do something," Dylan added as he studied his friends with concern. "Yeah, like find our parents," Rodney said fiercely, clenching his fists. "Rodney," Bill said, sounding angry as well, "we are part of something really big here. Did you even think that maybe we're not just supposed to run off and hide?" "Oh yeah, sure, that's easy for you to say. It's easy just to take off when you hate your parents." "I don't hate my parents," Bill roared, pushing Rodney to the ground with astonishing force. "They're not like your parents, Rod. Have you noticed how many concerned phone calls I've gotten since this started? I love them, and I would never want anything to happen to them. I loved Larry, man. That douchebag was actually pretty good to me. But shit, man, they barely know I exist, and Mom is like a kid herself. I just don't mind being here with you guys all that much." "Bill," Dylan said, taking his friend's arm gently. "What?" he said, turning with tears running down his cheeks. "Your eyes are red." "Huh?" he said uneasily as he walked to check his reflection in one of the Jeep mirrors. His jaw fell slack at the sight of his irises, turned to a subtle, dark crimson. What the hell did that wolf do to us? Despite Rodney's ongoing protests, the consensus agreed to return to the relative safety of the Indian cave. They settled on a rotation for a night watch, which proved mostly pointless, since no one could sleep, except for Dylan, who fell into a bottomless slumber sometime around the dark morning hours. It was in this state of deep unconsciousness that he once more met the being who had come to him the previous night. He saw the long, dark folds of the thing's shroud blowing in the breeze like window curtains in a summer storm. The visage was hidden in the cowl as it hovered above the ground at the mouth of the cave. Dylan approached it slowly, and then, keeping a distance of some 3 steps, he carefully studied every detail he could visibly discern. The thing seemed almost shapelessly amoeboid as it hung somewhat suspended above the ground. He was now aware that the cloak, which flapped and whipped in the wind, was in fact a dark violet color, and may have at one point been a blanket for some large, expensive bed. Under close scrutiny, it appeared that, in all probability, it was most likely without a body, as the cloth seemed merely hung over the upper portion of the hood. His investigation was interrupted when again he heard the strange voice he remembered from his previous dream begin to speak. Deep, ominous, but oddly reassuring, as Dylan had come to accept the being as some sort of ally, if not a guardian. There are safe places. The voice rumbled in concentrated effort to speak clear English. You must find the locations before your technology begins to fail. But the grid may not fall. The internet is still working, Dylan replied before realizing he was trying to inform something that may even be knowledgeable of future events. Do not fool yourself. The tragedy has but begun. The accent that Dylan was detecting had to be Russian, and in no way modern. But the army is involved, and they're rescuing people now. They cannot hide within their bases. You, your sister, and your friends are among a few who will be able to bring survivors to safety. There is one who has prepared for this and left havens for the lost. You must find these places, for you are charged with saving as many as you can. Also, you must look for certain signs. When the storm comes, you must begin your journey south. Until then, always watch for the horse. Your powers have changed now that you are thralls of the wolf god. You must be cautious, for its ways are wild, and its will hard to fathom. You are its chosen, its blessed. Above all else, it will require your loyalty, and in return, it will give power to you. It will not abandon you. In fact, you may never be rid of its presence. The serpent will continue to feed, and its appetite is such that it will devour until none are left. Its will is thwarted, so now he is alone and will soon go mad. Dylan had listened and slowly made his way to the being's side. Reaching forth, he pulled the shroud away and immediately fell back at what he now saw. Floating in the air was only an ancient skull, which slowly turned and stared down, a light like amethyst glowing in its mouth and empty sockets. "Farewell, child of the wolf. Perhaps we will meet again." Dylan once more woke to find the entire group staring at him in a palpable cloud of suspense. They knew he had had another dream, and were waiting on edge to hear its description. "Barb," he began as he sat up, wiping sleep from his eyes. "Get on your phone. Start searching for anything applying to safe havens where these things can't go. You'll have to hurry, because we're about to lose the internet." "But it probably won't go down, Dylan," she started to say before he quickly interrupted. "It's going, Barb, and probably soon. Whatever we did, we didn't do enough. And this thing is worldwide. Somebody had prepared safe places where people can go, and we can find out where if we hurry. The skull said that they were legit." "The skull?" Rodney said, holding up his hands questioningly. "Oh, the ghost of Christmas future. He's just an old frackin' skull with a blanket tossed over him." "Makes sense," Bill laughed, nodding to himself, as if he had already considered the possibility. "Well, did he give you any kind of clue what to look for?" Barb was squinting at her phone as she entered keywords like safe haven and hiding places. "I was under the impression that they wouldn't be too hard to find." "Wow," she answered as her eyebrows rose in astonishment. "What is it?" Rodney was looking over her shoulder suspiciously. "How about an article titled, 'Did Angel Love Know?'" "Angel Love?" Bill mumbled as he rifled through his backpack before withdrawing a box of Pop-Tarts, which he tossed to Dylan after removing a silver package for himself. "The talk show chick?" "She was a hell of a lot more than a talk show host, Bill," Barbara amended as she rolled her eyes at Bill's male ignorance. "She was a worldwide spiritual leader. People came from other countries just to get advice from her." "Advice on what?" Bill asked as he bit half a pastry hungrily as he leaned on the cave wall, his strange eyes reflecting the firelight with an unsettling red glare. "Everything," Rodney answered, suddenly seeing an opportunity to indulge in one of his favorite pastimes, lecturing. She counseled world leaders on politics and the medical industry on healing. She opened these healing clinics all over the United States long before she was ever on television. "Health spas?" Bill said incredulously. I guess you could call them that, except that people actually got cured. We're talking cancer remissions, severe psychological abnormalities disappearing. These places had become shrines." "Exactly," Barb said from her reading. "Before she died, she died. When was that?" "Seriously, dude, do you ever watch anything but Big Bang Theory reruns? It was only a couple of weeks ago," Dylan said, finally weighing in as he picked at his cold Pop-Tart absently. "We got school out for it, for God's sakes." "Oh yeah, we went and saw the release of the Dark Tower. Anyway," Barb continued, taking a deep breath to maintain her composure. 4 days before her death, she was sending emails and posting messages on her website. One said, "To all my friends, if the worst should befall us, you must know that I have left sanctuaries for you. Go to my centers and be safe. I love you all." "Do you think she knew something?" Dylan said, finally laying down the Pop-Tart and trying not to fantasize about a sausage and egg biscuit. "I don't think that there can really be any doubt. The article says that she handpicked the locations. She was scandalized in the press because the sites were reportedly sacred to various Native American tribes, but they had no legal hold on the actual properties." "You mean like this cave?" Bill smiled again with the same "it figures" expression. "So we're not really supposed to round people up and get them to these places?" Rodney burst out, standing behind Barbara and waving his hands frantically, at such times reminding Dylan of Brad Pitt's character in The 12 Monkeys. "Like dogs herding sheep." To Rodney's dismay, Bill was sounding enthusiastic. "But Rod's gonna have to shave first." "What are you talking about?" check out your 5 o'clock shadow, bro. What? What are you talking about? Rodney rubbed his jawline dolefully, only to turn pale when he felt the long, light, blonde fuzz covering his cheeks and chin. He began to scratch the sparse growth, only to notice his fingernails were long, dark, and abnormally sharp. Oh, this is so uncool, he sighed, stretching his hands out before him. Puberty had to hit sometime, dude, Bill scoffed. Not funny, Bill, Barb snapped, staring at Rodney sympathetically as she unconsciously pulled at her hair, now seemingly even longer by several centimeters. Yeah, man, Dylan added. We don't know how far this thing's going to go. We might be running around on all fours licking ourselves by the end of the week. Rodney joked, his eyes still serious and troubled. His words, however, unhinging Bill, who almost fell over laughing out loud. At least we won't be crawling around on our bellies swallowing dogs whole, Bill gasped through his merriment. Good point, Dylan said, smiling as he reclaimed the Pop-Tarts and began eating with vigor. You would be happy about it, Rodney shouted as he pointed a long, pointy claw at Dylan. We all know what you were going to be for Halloween. We're so screwed. Rodney's exasperation was self-evident as he slumped down into his sleeping bag, rubbing his itchy new beard with contempt. There was more, Dylan resumed, sounding much more at peace now that he knew the skull had indeed provided truly helpful information. It was kind of cryptic, but it seemed like it was in a hurry. Guys, this rounding up survivors thing sounds like a long-term project. Barb was lighting up a cigarette despite Dylan's disapproving and disgusted glance, but instantly regretted the decision as the first cloud filled her mouth with a foul, nauseating mixture of dead plant and hot road tar. She found herself gagging as she threw the newly lit camel into the fire and began spitting in desperate attempt to rid of the taste. Oh my God! What happened to my cigarettes? Is someone trying to poison me? Just the cigarette companies, Rodney laughed, finally cracking a smile. No. There was something wrong with it. She sneered as she examined the pack, sniffing it as she studied the cigarettes one by one. Even the first drag I ever took didn't taste that bad. Ugh! The smell won't go away. The boys were staring at her with amused pity, as if she were a simpleton who had just discovered that she had been eating kitty litter as cereal every morning without knowing. Barb, haven't you noticed that everything smells different? As he said this, Dylan was thinking that the Pop-Tart he was eating tasted like a mouthful of pure cane sugar. What did that thing do to us? Barb said with bitterness as she threw the entire pack into the flames, immediately regretting the action when she realized the smell of the burning cellophane was even worse than the cigarette. He also said that there were signs we had to look for. He said we would have to go south when we saw the storm. Great. Nothing mysterious there, Rodney sighed as he laid down and covered his face with his hands as if wishing the world away. Yeah. And we're supposed to watch for the horse? The what? Barb said, looking up from her purse where she rummaged for some gum. Okay, like Flicka or Mr. Ed? Barb was stuffing 3 sticks of Everchew into her mouth, and her words were partially unintelligible. We need food, Bill chimed in suddenly as the growling in his stomach became audible and unending. Real food, Barb mumbled. Like meat, Rodney added from behind his hands. Well, we can't just cruise to Big Burgers, so our options are limited, Dylan reasoned as he rubbed his stomach painfully. Could we, like, kill a cow or something? Bill said, his voice contorted with discomfort. Don't be an idiot, Rodney snapped, sitting up and staring at the fire, the image of meat roasting on the flames appearing unbidden into his mind, the sizzle and smell becoming real and as lustful as his most secret sexual fantasy. I mean, that's crazy, right? Yeah, crazy, Barb said, wiping a sliver of saliva that had crept from her lips. I mean, you have to, like, skin it and stuff, right? Well, my dad showed me all that when we went hunting. He was now studying his friends in order to gauge their seriousness. There's no harm in trying, right? Bill said, grabbing his shotgun. I'm frickin' starving. So they left the cave, excited and ravenous for what Dylan had the distinct feeling would be the first of a great many hunts. Those born of a demonic bloodline may well be able to use the power of that particular demon. However, the Angekok is not born of any demon progeny, and is unlike them in many key characteristics. The Angekok will most often possess several slight talents from birth, such as mediumship, the ability to see and communicate with the dead, telepathy, the ability to glimpse the thoughts and motives of others, and varying degrees of precognition, an intuitive knowledge of future events. Most often, these abilities will be repressed and ignored by their host until they are increased in the presence of a greater power. Simply by coming into the vicinity of demonic presence, the automatic reflex of the Angekok will begin siphoning and storing this energy. If and when the Angekok becomes conscious of this process, they may in fact become parasitic to the entity. Unlike the descendants of demonic bloodlines, who may only exhibit abilities likened to the patriarch, the Angekok can draw and use power from multiple influences. However, the Angekok must be extremely cautious as to the redirected use of this energy, as any careless or unrestrained uses can most certainly ensure possession by one or more entities. Chapter 1. The Book of the Skull. His eyes slowly opened as the captain announced that the plane would soon be landing at the Gulfport Biloxi Airport in 15 minutes and that the passengers should prepare for landing. It was early morning and he gazed with sleep-blurred eyes at the rising sun over the green expanse below before spotting Biloxi's relative civilization approaching on the horizon. The Gulf was sparkling in the morning light, and he once more smiled with sublime happiness at the thought that he had made it here. He could still hear his mom's relentless beating away at his decision to go off to an out-of-state college. Who's even heard of Mossboro? Why are you so determined to go to college in a swamp? He had calmly explained that the Mossboro University possessed one of the most eclectic curriculums in the United States. This small school was home to possibly the best art, literature, and music forms that the country had to offer, and he had been accepted. But it's so far, Kurt. You can study art anywhere. His father's criticism had always been that Kurt was studying art history as a major in the first place. His mother's complaint was where he wanted to study art history. However, the strange and isolated Mossboro University advertised one of the most obscure libraries in the nation, rumored to contain a collection of some of the world's rarest books, and copies thereof available for student study. Kurt's interest in art had begun in childhood when at age 10 he had participated in a school field trip to the Cleveland Museum of Art. There he had attained his first glimpse of the magic and power that shaped the human perception as it was recreated by the hands and minds of some of the world's master artists. He had stared at painting after painting with the dawning realization that these visions of the universe were like photographs taken with some hidden device of the soul. Here were the painstaking recollections of people who transgressed normal expression and spoke with a language that communicated not only images but impressions of an existence shared in common by humanity. He had longed to touch the sculptures he saw with a desire he could not describe even to himself. He wondered how someone could bring such a representation of life from stone, but therein giving birth to a form utterly unlike its model in that it illustrated the interaction between the observer and the observed. Through this art, these people were interacting with the universe on another level beyond the given senses. Here was beauty, horror, lust, and adoration portrayed in an effort to share with empathy that even the artist rarely, if ever, could comprehend. At first, he had interpreted this newfound passion as a clear sign that he should join the ranks of those who he had become so enthralled. However, after many years spent struggling to attain some level of aptitude in various realms of artistic endeavor, he came to the heartbreaking conclusion that he had little talent in any of his beloved arts. Yet his expectation for the works in their creators did not waver with time. His fascination with artists proved to be the guiding light that led him through his studies. His love was as much in relation to the artists as it was to their work, and study proved that he was not of the psychological bent required to rise among these individuals. He had become aware with a great degree of certainty that these people were burdened with some need that he did not have in common. Whether it be the unyielding immaturity or some secret wisdom that propelled them, he knew that he was not like them, but still could not temper his fascination. He was like a child standing outside a wondrous aquarium, marveling at the stunning fish that swam inside, but fully well knowing that he himself could not live in those waters. By a peculiar design of his personality, he was somewhat timid, reserved, and self-protective of personality. The thought of a life filled with turmoil and emotional trauma was anathema to him, and he avoided conflict and any possibility of the loss of his own self-control. It was from this vantage point that he observed the frenzied existence of the world's artists as they went about the unexplainable transfusion of their personal energies into another medium. He stared through history's window into their lives and saw tragic soul-crushing alienation of which he could not explain. It was one of life's greatest mysteries as to why these skilled individuals scornfully tortured themselves with the refusal to just adhere to nature and resign themselves to the humility of succumbing to the service of civilized machination. Why is it that some view their very life in such an abstract politic? Kurt could only reason that it was because they had no choice. He now stood outside the airport and surveyed his surroundings before locating a taxi. He was starving and exhausted, but was filled with the excitement and curiosity that had originally inspired his entire journey. The driver was standing across the side of a green Monte Carlo that's only feature discerning its purpose was the lit sign on top. The man was a tall Native American who, from Kurt's reading, he guessed was probably of the Choctaw, who had a reservation in the area. "Need a ride, my friend?" the man said, smiling agreeably as he stood at attention, already opening the back door graciously. "I sure do, man. Can you take me out of town?" "Depends. What may be your destination?" "Mossboro University." "Young man, you are in luck. I happen to be the only cabbie in town that works out of Mossboro." Kurt sighed with relief and got in as the cabbie closed the door behind him. The driver got in and, leaning back over the seat, asked, "Mind if I put on some tunes, sir?" No, sure, go ahead." "You a fan of, Mr. Jimi Hendrix?" "I love him." "All right, then you're in for a real treat. I happen to have a rare live performance of Crying Blue Rain on this disc right here. I've been listening to it over and over all morning. I don't think I've ever heard that. Most people haven't. He only recorded it in the studio once. It's not available, since it hasn't been released by his estate. What I have here is a tape made by a club owner in Jackson, a man I happen to know personally." "You sound like a real fan." "He was a beautiful person, man. All the Nines were in their own way." Kurt watched as they drove out onto the street and thought a moment before asking, "The Nines?" "Dead at 27. Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, Cobain, Marilyn Monroe at 36. Do the math, buddy. 2 + 7 is 9. 4 + 5 is 9. 3 + 6 is 9. I get it, but what does it mean?" "Numerology, bud. 9 is the number of artists who use their talent for fame and fortune. Ever heard of a blues man named Robert Johnson from Greenwood? Soul to Soul at the Crossroads, right? That's him. Paid up at age 27. Yeah, but lots of artists die at different ages. Do you think the universe categorizes them like that?" "Buddy, I think the universe categorizes everybody." Kurt laughed politely but asked no more questions about the driver's logic, as he had come to the conclusion that his superstition might border on grandiose absurdity if he were allowed to continue. He had heard of the 27 Club, as it was referred to the musicians that had been mentioned, but the theory of the Nines was somehow new to him. He resolved himself to enjoy the ride and take in the scenery, with only the music playing to fill the silence. Kurt had researched Mossborough thoroughly over the past few months, but was still taken by the strangeness of the town as they crossed the city limits. They had turned off of Interstate 90 and driven on a cracked, pitted blacktop for a half-hour through the deep woods of Mississippi. They had passed a massive conservation area where the road had taken on so many curves and hills that Kurt had the vague impression he was on a roller coaster. And then, after crossing a bridge so ancient that the boards seemed to creak beneath the car, they rolled up a seemingly endless hill that leveled out only after he saw the first and only sign during the course of the entire journey. It read, "Welcome to Mossborough, hometown of the Cottonmouth." Kurt stared with wonder at the vast forest around him, with every tree shrouded in veils and blankets of Spanish moss. "Is that referring to he began. "The snake. That's right. The bayous back here got more snakes than the town's got people, I guarantee. There's a diner here in town that serves fried water moccasin. It's a local delicacy. I suggest you try it." "No, thanks. I can't stand snakes." "Well, you definitely are going to the wrong place, my friend." Kurt stared with wonder at the old two-story houses that seemed to be packed together on every hill lining the streets. There were waist-high brick walls and iron fences along the jagged, overgrown sidewalks. Every yard was home to magnolia trees and flower gardens. Children ran with free-running mongrels out of the doors of screened-in porches with fishing tackle and baseball bats in hand, eager to use up the final days of their summer freedom before the school year started. As they drove over the main square, Kurt was astounded by the number of restaurants and diners that seemed to cover every imaginable cuisine behind a remarkable open market of vendors selling fresh vegetables and fish along the street itself. At least 3 corners were occupied by small groups of musicians playing various varieties of music. The most common, of course, was southern bluegrass, but Kurt spotted more than one cello and classical violin in the mix. "Is there some kind of festival or something?" Kurt asked as he smelled the aroma originating from a huge cauldron of frying Cajun shrimp. The driver laughed. "No, just another day. The market will be open every day unless the weather turns bad. The diner's main business is the students, and they tend to take every meal off campus since the school's so close." "Where is the school?" The driver turned off the square, driving at a snail's pace to avoid the constant pedestrian obstacle course on the street. "Right here." He pointed from the steering wheel at the huge pillared front stairs of a massive stone building that loomed foreboding over the town that was huddled around it. "No, that's just the library. But the dorms and lecture halls are all behind it inside the wall there." Kurt noticed that there was a huge moss and vine-covered gray stone wall that stood towering by the side streets and disappeared behind the houses. Mossborough had begun its life as an army encampment 24 years after the American Revolutionary War. French traders, accompanied by a large unit of organized militia, found what passed for high ground in the deep forest of the territory and settled into a small camp within which to trade with the local Indian tribes. The location proved valuable and lucrative to its founders, and the base had become a small settlement by the days of the Civil War, although its inhabitants had diversified into Irish and Scottish immigrants who had arrived during various periods of social upheaval in their homelands. The college was built on the foundations of the La Terrière des Mousse de Fort, but due to the magnificent wall built by the French not to repel attackers, but to hold back the floods which were all too common in the days before the local levees were constructed. The library was contracted by a mysterious and anonymous donor who had supplied not only funds but plans, books, and numerous rare works of art for the bizarre project. Locals identified the source as the infamous Love family, who in the 1920s commissioned another project in the area with the building of their secluded mansion. The college had sprung up soon thereafter as scholars traveled from around the country in order to study the rare books and art within, which by order of its benefactor, could not leave the grounds. Kurt paid the driver, and taking his one suitcase and backpack in hand, he walked in amazement along the wall until he came to an enormous wrought iron gate decorated in what else but coiled serpent forms enwrapping the bars. Shivering in his jacket, Kurt crossed the entrance and stepped onto the campus. The campus grounds were by no means large, but what the school lacked in size, it more than made up for in sheer style. Beyond the wall was a vast octagon made by a brick walkway that led from building to building. The structures were large and resembled the library in their European design and stone material. Kurt was struck by the feeling of displacement, as if he had crossed into another country that bore little relation to the American town outside. There were oak trees and granite tables where students sat in the sunlight reading and conversing. The students themselves were a mixture of every race and modern style of clothing imaginable. The atmosphere was one of freedom and individuality on a level that he had never experienced anywhere in his life. He saw two large buildings that resembled nothing more than Victorian townhouses that he knew from his internet tour were the male and female dorms. He approached, intent on locating the dorm office, which he found easily after climbing the steps to the large porch where a small group sat playing an amazing string accompaniment to a Mozart piece played by a professor on an electronic keyboard. You're rooming with Cho Fan Yoon, and you are on the second floor in room 15. Just go up the stairs, the serene red-headed woman with an Australian accent said, pointing to the wide carpeted staircase from behind her desk. You should have no problem finding it, and if by some chance you do, just ask a student. He thanked her, and putting his papers into his backpack, ventured on. The dorm was amazing, with rooms reminiscent of European hostels in layout with high ceilings and large windows covered in long, flowing, translucent white curtains. The decor and furnishings were very simple, possibly handmade chairs and beds of simple cherry-stained oak, inside off-white plaster walls adorned with the various murals depicting scenes from literature and mythology. The ceilings were very high, which provided the musically inclined with a wonderful acoustic value for their practice, and the windows at the right times of day would fill the chambers with soft, clear, natural light for painting and sculpture. The walls in the second-floor hallways were home to various frames of student art seated between the rooms, and pedestals topped with statues occupying every corner. Yet still the overall impression given was one of space and simplicity. Kurt saw the open door of room 15 and cautiously entered, seeing what would be his bed on the right, with bedclothes and blankets folded in neat piles at the base. As he ducked his head in, he saw the strange chaos that was Cho Fan Yoon. Cho was seated at a small desk in front of a computer with a headset microphone on, speaking to someone on the screen in what Kurt guessed was Korean. His roommate had apparently been at the college for days, since he had already plastered his walls with posters of Bruce Lee, David Carradine, and a host of what could only be UFC fighters. His bed was unmade, and clothing lay scattered in piles on the floor and corner chair. Cho had suddenly broken into English as he spoke to the Dell, running his hands through his thick black hair in frustration. Okay, Mom, I get it. No. I will not get fat eating American fast food. Mom, this town doesn't even have a Big Burgers. I'm serious. They have a Korean restaurant. I've got to go. My roommate is here. Yes, he's white. All right. With that, he ripped off the headphones and threw them to the desk with frustration. Cho took a deep breath before looking up with a smile. Parents, right? She was hoping I would get an Asian roommate. Hey, I'm Cho. The young man stood and approached Kurt with his hand outstretched. Although shorter than Kurt, his physique was compact and muscular. Kurt saw that his arms were corded with muscle as he shook his hand with a grip calloused and vice-like. You're Kurt Hartman, right? I'm Cho Fan. All I know about you is that you are an art history major from Cleveland. Yeah, that's right, Kurt responded awkwardly. What about you? Eastern philosophy, Cho answered, nodding to a beautiful golden Buddha figure that sat on its own pedestal in place of honor on the far side of the room. Hope you don't mind our third roomie? No, it's great. Are you into martial arts? Oh, you noticed, Cho laughed. Yeah, it's kind of a hobby or obsession, if you ask my folks. I study Jeet Kune Do in my spare time. Bruce Lee, right? Are you a fan? Yes, I love Bruce and Brandon. I got a Crow poster, if you don't mind me putting it up. Oh, buddy. I can see we're going to be getting along just fine. Let us imagine that the circumference of conscious perception radiates out around an individual entity to the degree of said individual's awareness. This sphere of perception would entail all that the individual being comprehends and may extend far into their reality, or may be little more than a mere bubble of consciousness in which they reside. Each sphere may pass or join with other spheres, thereby increasing in diameter or even becoming absorbed by another entirely. Let us also conclude that by being conscious of one sphere, said sphere increases not only in size, but in power. Chapter 2, The Book of the Skull. His eyes snapped wide open just before the creature in the nightmare leapt upon him. He shot up from the blankets, drenched in cold sweat, his body trembling and shaking. He sat on the side of the bed and trembled, wide-eyed and on the verge of tears, as he tried desperately to calm himself. He looked up and saw Cho sitting in his bed, elbows on knees, releasing a huge cloud of marijuana smoke from his lungs as he studied Kurt with shrewd interest. You really need to do a sleep study, dude. I mean, you've only been here 3 nights, and this is the 3rd time you've woke me up. I'm sorry, Kurt said as embarrassment began to cloud the mysterious hysteria. I've done sleep studies, and all the doctors can do is tell me that I have night terrors and sleep apnea. You've been tossing and moaning for like an hour now. What the hell are you dreaming about? I always forget as soon as I wake up. All I remember is that something is attacking me and I can't get away. I usually only do it a couple of nights a week, but I guess it's worse since I'm in a strange place. Here, take a hit and chill out, Joe said, offering the stub of a joint which he held pinched in his fingers, a long tendril of smoke rising from the tiny red ember. Oh, no thanks. I don't smoke. It's not a cigarette, man. It's weed. I know. I don't smoke weed or anything. You ever think of starting? No. I have no desire to try anything like that. Not even beer? No, man. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Is this one of these college roommate deals where you're all straight lace and I'm supposed to loosen you up? This is not going to happen. Kurt's voice was flat and unwavering in its complete presentation of this as a sound fact. Are you going to go back to sleep then? No, I'm getting up. But I'll just go for a walk or something. Cool. Bring me back coffee. Kurt stood and went to the small white-walled bathroom where he pulled on a pair of jeans and took a Depeche Mode t-shirt from where it hung on the doorknob. The vast majority of Kurt's shirts were collected at numerous concerts over the years, his habit being to buy at least one at every show. He looked down at David Gahan's brooding face staring at him from the chest. I feel you, written in large, dripping purple letters across the top. This particular shirt he had ordered online, since it had not been produced new since the 90s. He studied his own face for a moment, the large, downturned brown eyes, his light brown hair grown below his ears, and the thin blonde beard giving the impression of a serious, compassionate young man with a perpetually worried furrow to his brows. He was ridiculously thin and anemic looking, as if he was ill, but as it happened, he was in excellent condition and was known to even be surprisingly strong if tested. He quietly went to his bed through the darkened room, noting Cho's snores from the shadows to his left. He found his tennis shoes and slipped them on before quietly exiting the room and closing the door behind him. Cho had informed him on his first day that there was no need to lock the dorm room since thievery was unheard of at the school. These students desperately wanted to be here and would do nothing to jeopardize their position. The town itself was considerably crime-free, with only the occasional drunken brawl or teenage exuberance gone awry to require the need of the town sheriff and his one deputy. Cho had described the local police force as Mayberry-like, a reference lost on Kurt until Cho had whistled a few bars of the theme song. Kurt had apologized and explained that he had watched little or no television in his 19 years, a fact which had stunned his roommate tremendously, especially since the Korean-born student had a unique fascination with American culture that bordered on the ridiculous. Kurt felt that he had even inadvertently offended Cho with his lack of interest in a show called Walker, Texas Ranger. He was only redeemed in Cho's eyes by a love of movies, which they shared. The night outside was warm and humid. The moon shone so bright and clear that he could see the entire campus from where he stood on the steps. He contemplated his surroundings and eyed the back of the massive library on the far end of the octagon. This place was a mystery within a mystery, and for one so consumed with hunger for the past, its allure was unfathomable. Here it was, close to 70 years since its construction, and still no one had concretely identified who had conceived the library and filled it with such strange and rare acquisitions. What reason could someone have to place such a repository of rarities in the backwoods of Mississippi? There was little doubt that it had to do with the infamous Loves, but such connections were untraceable, even now. The family had disappeared and left no record of their involvements with the town or the Gothic library. After endless questioning, Cho had finally promised Kurt a surprise that would thrill him to his very bones, but refused any further comment. Kurt examined his watch, and finding the time to be 15 after, he began his journey into town to find an open coffee shop or diner. He had been assured that there was always a place to eat in Mossboro. Much to Kurt's disappointment, he learned that Cho's big surprise, revealed over coffee as the sun rose outside their window, was a party. I hate parties, Cho. I told you that. I know, man, but that's not the real surprise, Cho said, grinning as he sipped from the massive styrofoam coffee cup Kurt had carried from a nearby all-night diner. The party isn't the surprise. It's where the party is at, and who's throwing it. What do you mean? Okay, you know that the Love family might have built the library, right? And you know that they lived close to here. Yeah. Did you know that their house was still standing? What? Kurt's heart began pounding relentlessly as he slowly put his coffee down before he dropped it. And did you know that there is still one last known descendant of the family? You're kidding. She was an orphan raised by foster parents. A few years back, she started researching her family and doing interviews with retired social workers and stuff like that. Well, she finds out that she was left on the doorstep of a police station in, can you guess where? Mossboro, Mississippi. Give the man a cigar. So anyway, she comes down here, and sure enough, the sheriff was a deputy when she was found, and mentions that they had always suspected that she might be related to the Love family. Apparently, there were rumors that the last Love known to live out there was known to have shown up in town a couple of times and was obviously pregnant. However, she, like the rest of her family, disappeared. Now, here's the kicker. The last time that this Love woman showed up in town, she had a legal will drawn up at the lawyer's, leaving everything to the child should she choose to claim it. There was this entire inheritance just sitting there on the books. So she proves that she is in fact the doorstep baby, inherits an absurd amount of money along with the family land, and finds out that the family home is still out here in the bayou. So what did she do? She uses some of her inheritance to pay a tuition at the university and rents an apartment in town. Then she shells out a fortune to have the house renovated. Kurt was speechless and dumbfounded. How was it even possible that Cho had kept this from him for 3 days? Just looking at Cho's gleaming eyes answered the question. Anything else you're not telling me? Yeah, I've been chat buddies with her for years online. She's the one who invited me to this school, and it's her party we're going to the mansion to celebrate its completion. What's her name? Angelica. Angel for short. Formerly Angelica Houston, but now Angelica Love. Angel Love? You got it. What does she study? Psychology, but she's a painter. Does everybody here study one thing while they actually do something else? Pretty much. Maybe I don't belong here. I just study. Maybe you just don't know what you're actually doing yet. Although by no means thrilled at the idea of being stranded at a party full of strangers, even though assured by Cho that he would fit right in, Kurt was possessed by a singular curiosity to see the house. His emotions ranged from his intense interest to a steadily growing unease at the thought of delving farther into the mystery which he had so steadily contemplated. There was something surreal and terrifying about the idea of this long-forgotten mansion restored to its glory by a last remaining heir. The drive out to the party was no short trip. After finding the gravel back road at the edge of the town, the journey became a slow, meandering exploration of woods and swamp country. He imagined that at some point there had been cabins in the area, but otherwise, historically, the land was wild and untamed. The trees hung low over them, forming a long, shadowy tunnel as the road grew muddier and Cho's small car fishtailed uncontrollably in weaves back and forth down what had become little more than a path. Kurt had fallen into a strange state of anxiety, as if something dim and frightening was lurking at the edge of his conscience. He tried to rid himself of these feelings, but gradually the sensation had emerged as a déjà vu that lurked behind the veil of his awakened perception. He sat almost trembling and awaited his first glimpse of the mansion. Ahead, in the car lights, he saw two stone pillars standing off the side of the road, and only here did the forest thin out and the underbrush subside as it was recently tended. The stone pillars, both carved with giant snakes wrapped tightly around their base, held a large open black gate that was the twin of that at the college. Indeed, the sister of the college wall ranged out into the forest on both sides, and he wondered how far the barrier ran around the estate. The driveway led down into a valley, and from the top of the incline, Kurt saw the house. The mansion was a huge, pale apparition that stood foreboding and dreamlike in the vast grove of magnolias and maples that surrounded it. It was a bizarre combination of southern plantation and Victorian Gothic architecture, with a pillared front entry and balconied upper windows that shone orange and bright from within. The walls were solid stone, probably granite, and carried the thick solidity of a medieval fortress. The building had been, from its conception, engineered to endure and resist the elements of the Mississippi floods and coastal storms. It appeared vast, indestructible, and alive, more than any structure Kurt had yet to behold. Cars were parked all the way down the edge of the drive, and bonfires were burning in the freshly cleared garden-like areas of the estate. It was strange to see a historical landmark being used as the home of a massive college keg party. They parked and got out of the Volvo before beginning their swim through the enormous sea of students and locals who gathered in groups, drinking and dancing to the music that played from within the open front doors that stood welcoming and huge at the top of the steps. There was obviously a DJ inside who was currently playing a club remix of Tears for Fears' Shout. As they made their way up the steps, Kurt's legs almost buckled with the overwhelming familiarity that surged in his chest. For a moment, he thought he might hyperventilate when he saw the anteroom behind the entrance. "Never mind the music," Cho said, grabbing his arm. "Angel, she has a thing for the 80s. Kurt only nodded as he was unable to speak, as he saw the main room beyond. Although the house had electricity, it was now lit mostly by what had to be thousands of white candles burning on stands and candelabras. Everywhere there were people talking and laughing as if lost in the folds of some wonderful dream. Kurt gazed at the huge staircase which led up to a cross floor before sectioning off into 2 other flights leading to the 2nd floor. A spectacular chandelier hung over the stairs, its sparkling light illuminating a gigantic painting that hung on the wall above. The shining crystal glimmered over the portrait of a woman with a calm, pensive face and long, straight black hair, who surveyed all that passed around her with quiet, calm amusement in her mystical green eyes. Before he knew it, Kurt had nearly leapt from his skin when he beheld what could have passed for the same woman standing beside him. She had broke into hysterical laughter that almost caused her to spill the glass of wine she held in her hand. "It's okay," she shouted, grabbing his arm gently and releasing a most soothing and warm rush through his body. "I know," she said, withdrawing her touch, still giggling over the music. "I look just like her. It came in very handy in court." "Angel, this is my new roommate," Joe said, slapping Kurt on the shoulder with his steel grip. "I've heard a lot about you," she said, extending her small hand, which Kurt took gingerly, as he once more felt the wonderful warmth journey up his arm. "It's uncanny," she began as she withdrew and sipped her wine, gesturing at the painting. "That's my mom, though, so I guess it shouldn't be surprising. Her name was Maxine. She was the last person to live here." Kurt stared at her in disbelief. In his mind, he could see a cloudy vision of her someplace far away where it was dark and raining. He could see her reaching out. Are you all right?" "Oh, yeah, you look so familiar. You've probably seen me on campus or something. Hey, you want a beer?" "Oh, no." "He doesn't drink," Joe shouted, still squeezing Kurt's shoulder affectionately. That's cool. There's tea and soda, too." That's all right. I'm fine. I really just wanted to see this house." "So what do you think so far?" she said, raising an inquisitive eyebrow. "I was just wondering if there were any little blonde kids locked in the attic." He laughed nervously. She stared at him without response, prompting an explanation. Like flowers in the attic." "Yeah. VC Andrews joke. I get it. No, that was in Virginia. Besides, this is unofficially one of the largest plantation-style houses in the South. The closest one like it was Belgrove in Louisiana, and it was demolished in the 1950s. "Why do you say unofficial? It wasn't ever actually a plantation. It wasn't built until around the 1920s. And isn't considered a historical landmark or anything. Most people outside of Mossboro didn't even know it was here. I just really wanted to see it." "Yeah, that's why a lot of people came. Feel free to look around." Thanks," he said as he studied her intently. She was not, as he had first thought, a copy of the portrait. She was more athletic appearing, and her complexion was a dark tan that Kurt guessed was her natural complexion and not due to exposure to the sun. "Well, I've got to go mingle," she told him as she politely drifted off. It was only then that Kurt noticed that Cho as well was absent, and he was alone in the crowd of strangers. He was filled with an immediate urge to find someplace quiet and to hide until it was time to leave. The stairs once more caught his eye, and curiosity once more made the decision for him. Quickly taking a glance around to see if anyone was paying attention, he started up the stairs. He stopped only long enough to get a little closer look at the painting, which he judged an exceptional work of art. He studied the corner for a signature and was stunned when in the far right he saw a simple scrawl that read, "Henry Love." Apparently, Angel had inherited her talent for painting from a long-vanished uncle. He recognized the background as the fireplace that sat far off in the main room. Every detail was painstaking and exact. He guessed that this was most likely a strikingly accurate portrait of the young Maxine. Now, forgetting his discomfort, Kurt made his way further up the left stairs in a daze of wonder. He stepped into a hallway on the second floor that was lit by an antique electric lamps that sat on small tables beneath other paintings, which by their style Kurt was sure were also Henry's. The first was of two small dark-haired children who by their resemblance in age could only be twins. When he looked at the signature, however, Kurt's brow twisted in confusion when he saw the name read Macala Love. He studied the brushstrokes and obsessive attention to the slightest detail, but could find no difference in technique between the paintings. There was a small plaque at the base of the frame which identified the two as Andrew and Celeste. A few steps down the hall was another painting of two other children, a boy of perhaps 5, and an infant held in his arms dressed as to suggest a girl. This painting was labeled Henry and Maxine. So here was Henry painted as a child in the same hand he would later use to portray his sister. Kurt found the next portrait slightly unnerving, as the subject, named as David Love, was a young man in his late teens. He was tall and lean with long angular features and the huge slanted green eyes which were a trait held by each family member. He as well had black hair combed immaculately over a strangely shaped head, and was dressed in a suit which identified the time as the mid-30s or early 40s. The boy's demeanor was distant, sad, and unexplainably tragic. The last painting was of an adult couple, the parents standing side by side in an outdoor setting where they were framed in noon daylight and numerous flowers growing lush and beautiful around them. Kurt realized that the painting was done from a black and white photograph which hung small and framed beside the larger work. The woman in the painting, so tall, frail, and lovely beside the foreboding and powerful-appearing man, was none other than the artist herself, as the plaque read, Philip and Macala Love. Kurt turned away and walked towards a door that stood at the end of the hall, and he turned the knob and entered to find himself standing in a huge study, complete with shelves of various books and a table with a lamp on which to read. Here, too, was an ornate fireplace, and hanging over it was a massive silver-framed mirror which faced a window on the opposite side of the room that was the same size and shape. The window was open, and Kurt could see the courtyard and grounds below where the fire still burned and the group still stood laughing and singing in the dark of night. The wind carried the smell of flower blossoms and rain on the breeze which hit Kurt like the cool caress of night. The chamber was lit only by the table lamp, and Kurt found himself squinting to make out the titles of the books that lined the shelves. Many were in other languages, but the few he could read were strange treatises on subjects that ranged from astrology and the Kabbalah in accompaniment to texts on geometry, physics, and psychology. Many were worn from constant use, and when opened, were marked with notes that crowded every margin. He was holding a very old, maybe even first edition copy of The Golden Bough, Volume 3, when he saw a movement in the mirror to his right. There, only for a moment, Kurt was sure he saw, in the reflection of the window, a shape that floated outside as if on the breeze. At first, Kurt thought that it was a curtain or blanket caught on a ledge or a tree branch outside, but in one clarifying instant, his eyes focused on the shape of a long, flowing purple shroud blowing wildly in the wind. He whirled to catch sight of it in the actual window, but there was no sign that anything had been suspended in the space outside, nor was the image present in the mirror anymore. Kurt slammed the book shut and hastily left the room, feeling shaken to his core. He felt as if his vision was altered, and his surroundings taking on a slightly snowy, cold appearance. He found the top of the stairs and returned to the party below as he sought out the kitchen through a huge dining room, where a few scattered guests were seated smoking and drinking as they enjoyed pizza from towering delivery boxes that were stacked in a virtual wall along the table, accompanied by cardboard buckets of shrimp, fish, and chicken. Kurt was overwhelmed by a thirst like none other as he plunged through the swinging door into the kitchen. Like the rest of the house, the past met on a thin line with the present, as the style was still Depression era, but marked with the appliances of a new millennia. There was a brand new GE two-door refrigerator sitting amongst the cabinets and countertops that may well have been restored directly from the house originals. Kurt dove in and found a pitcher of iced tea, which without a thought he began guzzling from the receptacle. In the back of his mind, he had begun to wonder if he had somehow been drugged or was receiving some kind of second-hand high from smoke in the air. It was not until he was halfway through the delicious tea with lemon slices floating on top that he realized the house had become very quiet. Closing the fridge but still clutching the pitcher, he slowly walked back along the counter, his mind succumbing to whatever shifts in perception he was now experiencing. He was overwhelmed with the clean purity and untainted lightness that the world had taken on. He felt warm and comfortable as he gazed at the shining light on the ceiling with amazement. He had ceased to wonder what was happening and simply began to enjoy it. His mind had begun accepting information without question or doubt in much the same way as in a dream without lucidity. He pushed the door back open with amazement at its silent, slow-motion swing. He entered the dining room, which was now devoid of people, and he laughed out loud when he saw that there was indeed one occupant of the room beside himself. At first he thought that he was looking at a large bear with black-gray streaked fur that was shambling around the table, but through his giggling he observed that when it stood on its hind legs, it was much too large and shaped vaguely like a man. At first he thought of the legendary Sasquatch, but noticed its snout was elongated and its ears pointed. It was busily raiding the table and collecting items of food together in a pile at a chair in the center of the long antique table. After a moment it looked up with its ears twitching and nostrils flaring. It sniffed the air before turning its massive head and looking at Kurt with dark animal eyes. Kurt swayed on his feet, a dumb smile frozen on his lips as he watched it gesture at a chair across the table from it for him to sit. He slowly approached, still carrying his iced tea pitcher with childish possessiveness, and pulled out the chair. He sat and stared at the giant thing before him as it too sat down, the chair small and diminutive beneath, creaking as if ready to collapse. He watched amused as it withdrew an entire large supreme pizza from its box and, folding it like a sandwich, bit it in half. The second bite finished the pizza, and the thing placed its muzzle into a bucket of Charlie's Cajun catfish and began devouring hungrily like a dog eating from its bowl. Kurt had now decided that he was officially looking at a 9-foot-tall werewolf. After a moment it raised its head, the size of a bison's, and from the bucket, which swaying for a second attached to its face, fell to the table empty. It stared at Kurt, who then held out his pitcher of tea and said, as if speaking to any ordinary stranger, "Would you like some? It's really good." The creature growled softly and reached across the table, taking the pitcher in its gigantic, clawed humanoid hand like a beer mug. It poured the remainder of the tea, lemons and all, into its massive, sharp, tooth-filled jaws before silently belching. Kurt watched as the werewolf's lips spread wide into what would on any other occasion be a most unnerving smile. "Anymore," came a calm, low male voice in his head. Kurt laughed again as he realized it was the Wolfman. Maybe in the kitchen," he answered, pointing at the door with his thumb. You want me to get you some?" "No, but thanks. I don't have a lot of time. Sorry I'm late, but I think I beat the deadline." It had returned to shoveling pizza into its maw, but this did not seem to inhibit its ability to speak to Kurt telepathically. "Who are you?" Kurt asked with a laugh, causing the werewolf to stop and sit up with half of a sausage and mushroom pizza with extra cheese hanging from its jaws. "You don't remember." "Oh, God, I should have known." "Remember what? What is going on here, man?" It chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I'm Not really sure myself, bud. I'm sure you've noticed that this seems like a dream or an acid trip or something. It's kind of like that for me, too. So this isn't real. Oh, it's real, alright. We're just sort of in another state of consciousness. Some people call it a dream walk. Only I can remember a lot more than you. But I'm a little bit more used to this sort of thing. Something has brought us here together, and I sort of know why. But you have to believe that I'm your friend. Okay. It's always nice to make new friends. You seem nice enough. Alright then. Have you met Angelica? Yeah. Yeah, she's my new friend too. She's very nice and pretty. Good. Now listen. You have to stay her friend, Kurt. You've got to stay her friend and stay very close if you can. Now she's found you, but that was the easy part. She's very important and she's in very big trouble. You've got to watch out for her. Got it? Kurt nodded his comprehension. The werewolf eyed the food before him with longing. Man, I wish I could take some of this with me for lunch tomorrow. Anyway, I'm out there somewhere looking for you, even if I don't know where. Remember everything I told you. I will. What's your name? Once more the jaws spread in the toothy, frightening smile. Steve. My name is Steve. Steve the werewolf. Kurt awoke to find himself seated at the table with Cho and Angel sitting beside him, smiling with worried looks. He looked around and gradually readjusted to the darker, more solid reality of his environment. He looked over and saw that an empty pitcher was still clutched in his right hand. Wow, you really don't like parties, do you? Cho said, nudging his elbow. I mean, seriously, bro. You slept through the whole thing. I see you found the iced tea, Angel said, giggling girlishly, obviously more than a little intoxicated. Oh, where is everybody? Kurt mumbled groggily as he rubbed his eyes. Party's over, man. It's 3 in the morning and time to head out. Cho was standing and stretching before moving his keys from his pocket. You're driving, man. I'm toasted. Kurt took the keys and stood looking at Angel, who was smiling with half-closed, bloodshot eyes. It was nice meeting you, Kurt. Maybe I'll see you around. Yeah, maybe. Thanks for the tea.